Welcome to the Ceva Animal Health Webinar on Troubleshooting Chick Mortality. My name is Dr. Marshall Putnam. I am the Senior Director for Technical Services for U.S. Poultry. With me today is Dr. Matilde Alfonso, who is a member of the U.S. Poultry Technical Services team. She has extensive experience in pullets, breeders, and hatcheries. With her is Dr. Donna Hill, who has been an hatchery incubation consultant for decades, focusing on the impact of incubation on chick quality. For the last 2 years, we have had a significant increase in requests from our customers to help troubleshoot chick mortality. And as we have looked at these chicks in the field, we have seen some common issues that point towards a root cause. So in a question and answer format today, where Dr. Alfonso will ask Dr. Hill the questions that we typically hear from our customers, help identify what are you seeing in these baby chicks that point towards a root cause? What are the tools that you can use to help confirm that? The root causes, and then potential corrective actions that you can take to help improve chick quality. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hill and Dr. Alfonso. While we're focusing primarily around U.S. poultry industry today, we'll talk about in this webinar the practices and the principles that will apply across all hatcheries. So Dr. Alfonso, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much. I hope you can hear as well. And thank you, Donna, for being here today. Hope you can see the screen there. As Marshall mentioned, this is going to take in consideration the things that we've seen in the U.S. recently in terms of issues with elevated chick mortality. And I wanted to show something that is it's really striking to me. When you put in perspective what has been happening in the U.S. broiler industry in the last 10 years. And those are numbers that I got from AgriStats. The blue line represents the average hatchability for the broiler industry in the U.S. between 2012 and 2022. And you can see a downward trend. I mean, we've lost about 5% hatchability in 10 years. And if you look at the orange line, that is your average 7-day mortality for the same time period. And the 7-day mortality has doubled pretty much. So that on its own is a very concerning picture. And as Marshall mentioned, we've been troubleshooting a lot of chick mortality issues recently. But I wanted to put things in perspective from my experience over this period of time. So if I look at this orange line showing 7-day mortality, and looking back into the first part of that decade, the main trends that I saw in chick mortality in the field was either bacterial contamination, which you would mostly find related to old flocks, or dehydrated and starved out chicks that were mostly coming from your younger flock, smaller egg sizes, weaker chicks, and so on. And occasionally you could see hatchery defects like red hogs, large navel, but still the mortality was around 1%. And then, just 2, 3, 4 years later, antibiotics were removed from the hatcheries. There was no more in novo injection of gentamicin or ceftiofur, and the chick mortality went up. And most of what drove that increase in chick mortality was bacterial contamination. And it made sense, you don't have an antibiotic to control that bacterial overgrowth, and you end up having more contaminated chicks in the field. At that time, the hatchability was still pretty good, north of 84%. So there was a lot of embryonic heat in the machines, and you could see some overheating in chicks. And that was exacerbating, in my experience, any bacterial contamination that the antibiotics were not controlling anymore. So an increase in that, and still the background of dehydration and starved out chicks. And lately, it's like there's been this perfect storm in the industry. And that's what's driving the hatchability down. A lot of it is just shortage of hatching eggs. So folks are either hatching or setting eggs that are too little in the beginning, or too dirty to start with, or keeping hens in the field longer, trying to get as many eggs from those hens as possible. which in turn is not helping fertility for the flock. If you're keeping older hens in longer and longer, those hens lose feathers, they cannot store sperm as good, the fertility goes down. On top of that, you get introduction of new males in the market that haven't performed as expected, so that hasn't helped overall fertility either. And lately, because of COVID and shortage of labor, higher construction costs, folks have not been able to build enough hen houses to accommodate for extra production. So all this happening at the same time has led to see more bacterial contamination, dehydration, starve-outs also, I would say, in the increase because of hatching smaller eggs. And the industry has still focused on preventing overheating. But the difference is that right now, the embryonic heat in the machines is a lot lower. The fertility is a lot lower. So when you're hatching south of 80%, I don't think you need to be as concerned in overheating as you were when we were hatching 84, 85. But that's still going on because we knew overheating was not helping anything, and the mindset is still there. And what I've really seen, which is kind of the highlight of this talk, is this pattern of mortality that I hadn't seen in the past as a pattern. I may have seen eventually 1 or 2 chicks, but now it's widespread. You can see it across the industry, especially in locations where the hatchability is low. And it's this group of unthrifty chicks and or non-starters or shorties or weak chicks. For lack of a better term, I'm going to call them unthrifty. And by unthrifty, I mean you can go into the progeny of a prime hen flock, like let's say a 40-week-old, and that's a field example. You go in there at 4 days of age, and you find a lot of chicks, I mean hundreds of chicks along the house. They're just sitting there. They're a lot smaller than the good ones in the flock, way smaller. And then you look at them and you really don't find much wrong with them in terms of like a very large navel or really bad red hogs. They're just small. They are dehydrated, but then when you look inside and you look for the normal causes of dehydration, one thing that is pretty striking is that many of those chicks still have a big yolk sac that it should be gone by then or halfway gone by them, but it's still there. So you wonder, well, that chick has the resource to survive. The yolk is not contaminated. Why are those chicks not making it? And that's why, when I was seeing this as a pattern, I called Donna. It's like, Donna, I'm seeing all this. You've worked on incubation more than anybody that I know. What's going on? So what are these unthrifty chicks telling us? What can we learn from this? So that's going to be the first question. And I've got this question from other colleagues in the field that are seeing the same thing. So we wanted to share what we kind of know by now. So all yours, Donna.
Thank you, Matilde. We're all very familiar with the concept of feed conversion, the amount of feed it takes to produce a pound of broiler meat in the house. And we all work with optimum environments in the house to optimize the feed conversion. So it's a familiar concept. It's one we use every day, one we don't use every day, but we need to think about in the same way is the concept of how efficiently do we convert the yolk to an embryo into a chick. So it's the same as, again, it's the same concept as how efficiently we convert the yolk to chick. So when we talk about incubation and efficiently converting yolk to chick, we need to think about the fact that incubation is an energy equation. Just like the broilers in the house are basically an energy equation. The more optimum you provide the environment, the more optimum you get feed conversion. So incubation is the exact same concept. It's an energy equation. The more optimum the environment allows the embryo to most efficiently convert yolk contents to chick. So that is the underlying concept of where we're working today in this webinar. So what do chicks do when the environment is not optimum? The embryo, just like the chick in the broiler house, is going to restrict growth to survive. And so what we look for is the more optimum the environment, the larger the chick is at hatch. So this is where the talking about chick length comes from. You can measure the incubation by measuring the yolk conversion to chick. In other words, measuring the chick length. So these are chicks from the same hatch, and you can see the poor incubation and the shorter chick. You can see the poor incubation in the shorter chick and the good incubation in the larger chick. So you also notice that there is a button navel. And so the other thing that you see besides chick length is the poor feathering and the other defects that the poor incubation chick has. So chick length gives us an objective observation of incubation quality.
So Donna, you can see very clear in that picture there. There are obvious differences in size of those chicks. The length is different. How do you objectively measure chick length? Like if folks are in the field and they want to know, because like naked eye you can tell, but how much is too much? How do you do it? That's a question that we're getting. Sorry about that.
Yes. Basically, I started in 1998 looking at trying to find an objective evaluation of chick quality. You noticed in the previous slide that the poor incubation chick had other defects, which is the way that most chick quality evaluation is based on defects. But when you have a small chick, you have other defects, but the chick length gives you that objective evaluation of chick quality. And I started with chick length in different areas of the machine, looking at chick quality and chick length based on where it was in the hatcher and the setter. And I found that it correlated with the environment of the hatcher basket and the setter location. That in other words, I had more small chicks in areas of poor incubation environment.
There you go. Nice cooperating.
Yeah. So you see that we have a ruler, and we place the end of the beak on the 0 centimeter mark, and it is in centimeters. It makes it much easier to measure. And you stretch the chick to its maximum length. You need to go to the maximum length because it's meaningless if you don't. And you need to measure to the end of the middle toe, excluding the nail. And just as a matter of convention in developing my standards, we round down to the nearest half centimeter. And that is adequate to measure chick quality to the nearest half centimeter. When you start trying to do it to 1/10 of a centimeter, you basically are expending a lot more effort and doesn't really matter.
I found that how you stretch the chick you really need to correlate to get meaningful results. If somebody different is doing it, you got to work with people to make sure everybody's calling length the same way. That's the only subjectivity that I see out of these.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, Matilde. is that you do need to correlate with your people that are doing it to make sure that most people are a little hesitant at first to stretch it to the maximum length, and they're a little bit not as aggressive as they should be about getting the beak on the 0 mark. So correlation, but that's a few minutes. That's really not hard to do. And you can be sure that your measurement and your QA person's measurement are the same. So in these pictures, you show the end of the beak on the 0 mark, and we're measuring to the end of the middle toe. And you can see that this one is 18.4 centimeters. So rounding down, I would call this an 18-centimeter chick. These are the standards that I've developed. As I mentioned earlier, I've been doing chick length since 1998. And so I've done a lot of chicks and basically worked out the normal chick length at day of age. And so I use less than 34 weeks for young, prime for 34 to 50 weeks, and old for greater than 50 weeks. Those are the points that the incubation process is impacted by breeder flock age. So you want to measure each age group. And normal chick length in the young flocks at day of age is 19 to 21 centimeters. Prime, 19 and a half to 21 and a half, and the old 20 to 22 centimeters. So the chicks should basically continue to get larger as the flock age gets older. Small chicks, I look at what percentage of small chicks I have in a group, in addition to looking at the normal sizes. And so anything less than 17 and a half for a young flock is considered a small chick, prime less than 18, and old less than 18 and a half. So you want to basically look at it in two ways: what's your average, what's your normal size, and what's your small chicks.
Because Donna, those small chicks are going to be more prone to die early on, right?
Yes.
You didn't develop properly. Yeah. And, I don't know if you can see it in the screen, but Donna came up with this ruler. It's just a ruler, but with the standards in there. So that makes it very easy when you're looking at your mortality to see where you are, how far off you are from where the chick should be. And that's a good example there.
So the chicks, you can also use this concept to take it into field evaluations. And the chick is growing about 1 centimeter a day through about 5 days of age. So you have, in this picture, you're measuring the chick in the field the same way you're measuring the hatchery. And the normal chick at 5 days of age was about 25 centimeters. But you can see that the compromised chick at 5 days of age is still the size it was expected to be at hatch. So it's small, it's actually smaller than that. And so you have a chick that the conversion of yolk to chick is poor. So you didn't have the growth to hatch a good quality chick to begin with. And I think Matilde has some comments on her experiences.
Yeah, because I've been taking this concept to the field and doing chick mortality troubleshooting with it. I mean, I normally to go into operations, just looking at chicks, internal examination, and so on. But what I've been doing recently is I've started measuring those chicks before I go into looking what's going on inside, right? And I'm finding a lot of these birds that are not even making chick length at hatch. Like the one on the right side of the picture, 5 days of age, and that chick, I think it was from a prime flock or an old flock, and it was already too small. It had been there for 5 days with an opportunity to grow, and it hadn't. So you can place a chick, the day of age doesn't look a lot smaller than the flock mates. At 5 days, if it didn't do anything, the difference is going to be dramatic. And you know that a chick that is not eating probably is going to lose weight, but it will not shrink. The length is the length. It is what it is. So you see chicks are there that did not even make chick length, expected chick length at hatch. That quickly points out to an incubation problem. It's not that that chick didn't get water, didn't get feed, it was something related to brooding. Well, it was secondary because it didn't have the strength or the development to be capable. So that's been a very useful tool for broiler techs to give good feedback to hatcheries. Instead of saying, oh, you send me a bunch of bumblebees, just little bitty chicks, they just didn't do anything. Well, now you can give feedback saying, out of all the chicks that I looked at, 80% of them are not making expected chick length at hatch. Or the other way around. I mean, all of them were good size, but I just saw a lot of omphalitis or yolk sac infection. It brings clarity to the picture when you're trying to sort out a problem that a lot of people is having now these days. Just the elevated 7-day mortality is driving people crazy. So I found this was good tool to add transparency and improve feedback between broiler department and hatchery department to be able to solve the problem. So the question is, what is causing this? What is causing all that? We talk about incubation, but what into it? It's very easy to point at the hatchery. What are the opportunities?
So we start with the foundation of incubation. And ideally, we're going to have a 99.5 to 100.5 embryo temperature from the beginning to the end of incubation. And that's this has been supported in the literature to show when you deviate from this, you have hatch and quality issues. So when we look at multi-stage incubation, you have in the light blue box, the 99.5 to 100.5 standard that we're shooting for. And in multi-stage, your air temperature is constant and your embryo temperature varies. So with the constant temperature, when the embryos are not producing heat, you basically have embryo temperatures that are below the optimum of 99.5. And it's just a fact of multi-stage incubation that this will occur. As the embryos start to produce more heat with the same air temperature, now your embryo temperature is above your air temperature. So that's the area that most people in the US have been working on for these last couple of years, is to try and bring down that embryo temperature on the end. Well, the consequences of that are that you are also lowering the temperature in early incubation. So you've created an impact on early incubation by trying to do something good on the end. And that is a significant impact that is driving a lot of these issues that we see in the field. In single stage incubation, you have the same 99.5 to 100.5 goal. And in this case, the idea is basically to maintain that 100-degree embryo temperature throughout the incubation process from beginning to end, and to vary the air temperature to accomplish that. So you see early in incubation that the air temperature is above the embryo temperature to maintain that 100 degrees. It's just a matter of physics. You have to have an air temperature above your goal when you have eggs that aren't producing heat. Again, as the embryo starts to produce heat, the air temperature has to drop to keep the embryo temperature at in that same range of 99.5 to 100.5. So that is the way single stage should work. But in reality, what you have are a lot of variation within the machine. And that variation means that you have cold embryos and hot embryos. So you're generally accomplishing what you're working for in the first 9 to 10 days by maintaining the air temperature relative to the embryo temperature. But after about day 11, 12, then you start to see the variation that's inherent in the ventilation and the design of a lot of these machines that we see out there. So you're trying to balance the areas of overheating and the areas of overchilling. So
Go ahead.
the overchilled embryos, again, we're going to see these shorter chicks. And so one of the thought processes I'd like to introduce is just that short chicks are not always from small eggs. Short chicks, again, are these poorly developed chicks with other signs, but the chick length tells you they're underdeveloped.
So if we know these deviations from the ideal range for embryonic development, that out of 99.5 to 100.5 could be an issue. And we know as an industry, we've been focusing on preventing overheating, especially at the end, but also folks are looking into some embryonic temperatures of transfer, chasing those hot embryos. They don't want to get hot embryos. But at the same time, they could be getting cool embryos in the front. So how do you check for those things? How can we check when are and where are we getting these deviations? What can you do in a hatchery at that level?
Basically, we have two tools to evaluate the situation. We have the ruler to do the chick length, and we also have temperature probes. And your choice of temperature probe is crucial because a lot of temperature probes out there are not accurate. I've always used the Cooper and an insertion into the embryo, and that works consistently. So when we talk about embryo temperature, again, we want that 99.5 to 100.5. But you have different in single stage, like we showed in the earlier graph, you have different conditions based on the age of the incubation age. So you want to sample at different locations in the setter, and you want to sample different days of incubation. So in other words, determine where your problem is occurring. Is it the variation, or is it just basically cold temperatures in different days? So at transfer, we're also going to talk more about embryo length. And at transfer, you can also look at your embryo length. And just as in chick length, there are standards. And when you have 4 to 5% smalls, then you have a good incubation result.
Multi-stage, because it's different. You don't incubate things the same way.
And what's achievable in multi-stage is different than what's achievable in single stage. So achievable in multi-stage is 98.5 to 101.5. And that's really both Chickmaster and James Wade multi-stage. And again, we can look at the embryo length at transfer, and it's the same standards. You want no more than 4 to 5% small embryos. So I've done a lot of embryo lengths. To measure embryo length, we're measuring from the tip of the beak to the end of the middle toe. We're stretching the embryo to have so that there's no slack. We're rounding down to the nearest half centimeter, and any embryo less than these standards below is small. So it's just the same as looking at the chick. The same measurement technique. They're just different standards for because you're doing it at transfer. And when you're doing it at transfer, some people do it at 17, some people do it at 18, some 19. So again, you have a set of standards of 14 and a half, 15 and a half, and 16 and a half in young flocks. And prime and old, it's a centimeter larger. So 4 to 5% of these small embryos is a good result. And just to take a look at the normal embryo size and development, to me, development's important because you see that at transfer, you have basically normal embryos. You have basically normal embryos, and you should see consistency in these embryos. As you see in this picture, all of them have the yolk still to be absorbed. All of them are fairly well developed. Contrast that to small problem embryos. So you can see on the right, the smaller embryos compared to the normal embryos. And again, these are not small eggs, they're poor incubation quality. And that's why you see all of the developmental issues in them. So you can use these to evaluate the quality of your setter incubation.
How about the hatcher?
The hatcher, you can measure the temperature. So again, in the single stage, we still want this 99.5 to 100.5. And you want to measure your embryo temperature before the chicks hatch out. So really, I standardize that to day 19. And you can also use the same concept of embryo length in your normal residue breakouts. And so you're measuring the embryos that didn't hatch. And you have a goal of less than 2% small feathered embryos and less than 1% large feathered embryos. And in multi-stage, again, your goal is a little bit different. You'll have about a 99.5 to 101.5 on day 19, but it's still the same day of incubation to measure. And your goals are still the same in your residue breakout. So this gives a little bit of a graphic of what we were just discussing. When you look at mortality in your residue breakout, you see that you have a group of chicks that all look to be the same incubation day of mortality. But embryos don't die because there's a certain insult on a certain day. They restrict growth to survive. So you can use this in your breakout. And since, if you remember, your normal embryo length at transfer was 17 days in the prime and old on an 18-day transfer. So anything less than 17 centimeters in prime and old is an incubator issue. Anything above that is a hatcher issue. And again, you want your goal to be less than 2% smalls and less than 1% large. So you're evaluating, at this point in time, you have an evaluation of setter or hatcher.
And when you look in breakouts, a very standard practice in the industry is, well, you see that they are big, they are feathered, you call it late dead. Or maybe you're lucky, they call it 19 to 21. But I haven't seen people looking the way you look at these embryos based on development. And that's a piece of information where could help you identify what needs improvement. If it's your setter or your hatcher, instead of, oh, it's just late dead. Yeah, late dead, sure, they die late, but the problem could have happened a lot sooner. So I think we're missing some there. So
the embryos generally die with the stress of hatch, the high energy, high demand time. And so your day of death is usually all on the very end of incubation. But again, it's whether they've restricted growth to survive.
Yeah. And those underdeveloped chicks, sometimes they have not used their yolk sac.
Mhm.
Sometimes, yeah, but a lot of these that we're seeing these days, they have a yolk sac that is sitting there, is healthy, is full of nutrients. They haven't converted it. So why? Why? Everybody's asking that.
Yeah. You'll find the chicks with both no yolk and large yolks. Predominantly, I'd say large yolks. But the reason for this really is very limited in the literature because it's just basically a new situation that's being created. But we know that overheating on the incubation causes poor yolk utilization, small heart size, poor intestinal development, poor immune system development, thermoregulation, muscle development, and yolk-free body mass.
There's a lot of research in that area on the overheating at the end. That has been recently produced by universities and research facilities. But you look on the cold side, there's not that much out there.
Yeah, there's not. And, to find anything that basically correlates incubation temperature and growth restriction based on temperatures, you have to go back to Romanoff in 1960. And in this slide, he shows the optimum and the cold. And you can see at this point where you have small embryo, and then contrast that to this one, which would be the optimum incubation temperature. And you can see that you have a lot of embryo size restriction at that point. So to me, the concept is that both hot and cold incubation conditions are both a lack of proper development of these crucial systems in the development of the chick.
And we were not used to the cold part. We were
Right.
used to the hot part.
Right.
Industry was hatching good, was a lot of embryonic heat, but it's not like this. The last couple of years, it hasn't been like this. So if we're sending these chicks out there, because some of them make it to the field, then what are the implications for that at the field level?
Well, early when I started in the 1990s talking about embryo temperatures, when I first discovered it, I decided to apply that concept in the research laboratory. And I increased the embryo temperature in the last 5 days of incubation. And I put the chicks in colony houses and sampled them complete tissue samples at 8 days of age. The conclusion of the histopathologist was that it was a toxic or viral enteritis when the only problem was overheating on the incubation. And you can see the impact of this. Yes, I did it fairly extreme in the temperature that I chose on 5 days, but it shows that incubation can create what we define, what we would normally evaluate as a disease or a toxic type situation.
And that's funny that you had that background experience, because we were working recently, early this year, on a case and took histopathology samples. And you can see that the report from the pathologist could be kind of like a carbon copy of what you said.
Yeah.
Intestinal toxicity. I mean, the intestinal tract had been severely insulted. So you end up getting all this blanded villi. The feed is going to be used properly. It's not going to be digested properly. It's not going to be absorbed properly. Even liver function may be impacted. And kidney, well, if the birds are not going to water, potentially you might have kidney damage as a secondary issue. But all these, how much is that contributing to poor uniformity, the whole broader performance continuum there, if you start like that from the go?
Yeah. I find it interesting, the comment under the far right section talks about delayed resorption of lipids at 5 days of age. So we talk about utilization of this yolk, which is going to work with the development of your immune system, development of the chick, the early start of the chick. And when you have, I mean, the crucial component of this is you have underdevelopment in multiple systems. So this underdevelopment means that the chick is not going to be functioning and converting feed to chick in an efficient manner because he's underdeveloped.
So you've been in hatcheries for a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been in hatcheries a lot recently, high demand because the industry is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
We're losing too many chicks.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say not only chicks, we're losing also birds later on. If you want to start right, you don't finish right. We know that. So what have you seen recently when you've been out and about and getting deep into measuring, using your tools and so on? Just big picture.
Yeah, big picture here. By the most common machines in the U.S., Chick multi-stage, low embryo temperature in the setter. Remember, we talked about how this problem started when we began to focus on preventing overheating in multi-stage. So what I'm finding is your operating temperature being less than 99.7. And I say operating temperature because controllers have different ways of working with set point. So the machine should be set, it should be operating at 99.7, and it should be operating on cooling, not heat, cool, or heating. And those are crucial observations to make in the Chickmaster multi-stage. Another problem we see is air intake. People want to run the machines at 75 degrees. 80 degrees supports the machine much better. In the Chickmaster multi-stage, again, you usually see damper issues, maintenance issues, and these are impacting how the machine is operating, which is going to be creating more variability within the egg mass and more cold areas early in incubation. Humidity spray in the setter. Anytime you're spraying, you're cooling the machine. So you're making these low temperatures on the beginning of incubation worse with humidity spray. And one of the big issues that we're facing now is low fertility, especially if you're setting single breeder age settings. So this low fertility means that the machine is not operating optimally. It's not maintaining that 99.7 setting uniformly.
Mm-hmm. And how in the hatchers?
In the hatchers, again, you want the air intake to support the machine, so at 80 degrees. A lot of people, again, trying to prevent overheating are using low temperature set points. And probably one of the biggest drivers I see in the US now is everyone going to hydrogen peroxide spray in the hatcher because of the no antibiotics. So that, again, it's a cooling situation when you're spraying in the machine. James Way multi-stage. This one has, I guess, the least impact of the changes that we've made to the setter because we're still using embryo temperature or egg temperature as the guidance in the set point. So again, you have your air intake, temperature is less than 80 degrees. You have your humidity spray in the setter. If you're spraying too much, you're overcooling. And the low fertility is the main driver with the James Way, especially if you're single breeder age settings.
When you have skips in those machines, that's usually tough on the James Way multi-stage. Just the skipping sets that contribute to that.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. We're all familiar with skip sets. but skip sets with low fertility can be especially damaging to and again, it's impacting the embryo temperature uniformity within the machine.
Mhm.
So you really need to set these machines with the fertility and the expected breeder age requirements from the manufacturer. In the hatcher, we're again looking at air intake, and again, low temperature set points in the hatcher. It's a good place for people to try and not overheat. But you can't look at the rectal temperature of the chicks to determine the running temperature of the machine after transfer. You really need to provide for the egg as well as provide for the chick.
Yeah.
And those are different conditions. Hydrogen peroxide spray in the hatcher, again, that is very much a negative in cooling the machine too much and not uniformly.
What I've seen in hatcher management, and again, this overheating in chicks, trying not to get rectal temperatures too high, people are very concerned, and they should be very concerned about getting chicks comfortable after they've hatched. Keep them before pool as comfortable as you can. But sometimes those adjustments they make are done too early because the embryo has not hatched yet, and we're too concerned about the comfort of that chick before it has hatched. And that's a very consistent finding out there. All driven by pulling ABF, pulling antibiotics, knowing that heat stress makes things a lot worse. It's been out there. And how about single stage? There are not that many in the US, but fair enough that you've learned something, right?
Yeah, and generally what I'm seeing is cold embryo temperatures after the gas seal phase of incubation. So the air intake is going to affect the single stage even more so than the multi-stage. So again, it's very important to have this air temperature of 80 degrees to support the incubation environment within the machine. What you see is a lot of variation inherent in the machine design. So cold incubation temperatures in the areas of the air intake. And again, set points too low after the gas seal phase of incubation. Because of the variation in machine design, it's hard to come up with the right balance between the hot areas and the cold areas. But you need to determine the set points for the majority of the egg mass. See, a lot of times, again, with our emphasis on preventing overheating, that we're over chilling 22 trolleys to not overheat 2 trolleys. And so from the standpoint of field performance and hatchability, if you can't get the variability out, it's better to overheat the 2 trolleys than to overchill 22. Okay. And in the hatcher, the relative humidity above 75% in the gas seal phase. A lot of people are pushing this maximum humidity in the early environment of the single stage, and that's a good thing because it promotes the uniformity and the heat transfer to the embryos to get a good uniform start. But when you go above 75%, you're going to see more bacteria in the chicks. So I put a limit on it at 70 to 75% humidity in the gas seal phase, and you don't see any problems in the uniformity of heat transfer to the embryos.
You had some examples of what you've seen, like this is field data that illustrate the point, right?
Yeah, this is Chick Master multi-stage setter embryo length. So again, the transfer of heat the embryo length. So was used to measure this. So your old flocks had a good mortality in the 99.7 set point, and your prime flocks had high mortality because they were using a 99.6 set point.
And you would expect the exact opposite.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. So your operating temperature at 99.6 was 99.4 to 99.6. And your operating temperature of 99.7 was 99.7 to 99.9. In other words, above the 99.7 that we set as a goal. And you can see the embryo length in that we have in the 99.6, we had 28.7% small embryos. It varies according to where they are in the machine, which is just machine function that was going on. And then when you get to the 99.7 set point, we only had 2.8% small embryos, well within the goal of 4 to 5%. So your embryos are telling you that you have poor incubation conditions for optimal environment development. This is a James Way single stage, and we talked about cold embryo temperatures after the machine starts to ventilate. And this is by location. You see the door on the front and the fans on the left, and you see the variability in the percent of small embryos. So we have everywhere from 0 to 41.7% small embryos based on where it is in the machine. So your warmer areas of the machine are in the back corner. Your colder areas of incubation are in the front along the door and along the fans. And you can see that in the embryo length. This one is the impact of hydrogen peroxide spray in the hatcher on the late dead, again, greater than 17 centimeter, like we talked about in the residue breakout. And you can see that on the top where the spray was mostly affecting the machine, we have 17.9% small embryos, and in the middle, only 1.8. So it's a very, very real problem that the peroxide spray is creating. And in the bottom right, you can see the spray nozzle in this area. But you also can look and see the impact of the spray. It's where the down collects on the trolleys, on the ceiling, on the door. So if you train yourself to look for these areas, you know you're overspraying and you're having a chilling effect in the machine.
And those down collection patterns vary a lot based on where the hydrogen peroxide is, what machine you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll tell you a lot if you look for that. So at this point, we've learned all these, you know all these, but what can we do? What can a breeder manager do? What a hatchery manager do? Even broiler managers, and there's communication. What can you tell them? What opportunities do you see?
Use your tools basically to diagnose the problem. So the correct diagnosis is the foundation that you have to start with. And to do that, you look at your temperatures, your lengths of embryos and chicks, and then you start to understand where you have a problem.
I'm sorry.
So when you're out of range, basically at that point, now you know is it setter, is it hatcher, and you have to dig in to determine the drivers. And the drivers, the first one to always eliminate is maintenance. You really need to have these machines working at their optimum. Set points, wet and dry bulb. Again, infertility and skip sets are affecting the machine environment. Setting of one age, especially infertile eggs. Air intake temperature, humidity. Machine design is going to drive your patterns. So are they normal, or are you having more problems than the machine should be giving you? Set points and damper interaction in single stage is a crucial point, because the cold air is impacting the environment. And any extra spray in the machine, even if it's peroxide for bacteria, is costing you hatchability and chick quality because it's cooling the embryos.
Like any systems, every time you install a system, and like this hydrogen peroxide system, they need to be managed.
Mhm.
Patterns, doses, timing, I mean, that needs to be managed. One of those that you just cannot install and forget about it. Check
Right.
a box. So you gotta pay attention to that. We're getting to conclusions here, Donna. We don't
Yes.
have much time left. So what would you leave folks with?
Well, over chilling is the predominant problem that I'm seeing in all machine types. Various reasons, but especially infertility. And infertility, and I might add management to that, maintenance. The machines are designed for a specific minimum fertility. They don't operate properly without this fertility. When the problem is a lack of embryo heat, for whatever reason, even the good flocks are negatively affected. And anything that we do to cause further chilling, such as maintenance issues, spraying the machine for either humidity or sanitation, or temperature set points, will only exacerbate the problem. Cold conditions are going to cost you more hatch and more chick quality from a field perspective than overheating.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back and you look, we did not have the mortality problems that we have today when we were overheating. And it's not okay to overchill these embryos early in incubation to prevent overheating.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real problem. And if you think about incubation, you go back to the beginning, we talked about the optimum embryo temperature is 99.5 to 100.5. That's for all genetics. And if you can achieve that, all of your genetics should give you a good result.
Mm-hmm. So if we put all this together, practically, you have a team of people in an operation that is dealing with high chick mortality. The broader team could be very effective at providing good objective feedback on the mortality. Not just bring up complaints, the chicks are dying. No, tell me what's dying. And then the hatchery manager can take that feedback and keep digging on what this be coming from. And sure, we know there's a big fertility opportunity across the industry. So breeder manager needs to be on board too. For the hatchery to be successful, you need fertile eggs. Not for having chances to hatch gears, and don't overlook that, we've been so focused on overheating that we may have been missing something that we're not aware that's going on, and it's in reality affecting your birds. So I thank you very much for your time. I've been working with Donna this week, and it's been fantastic, the learning. So I guess we can open the floor for questions. Appreciate you doing this. I know it's
Thank you, and I hope that this helps people understand their problems better, because that's the key to starting to make improvement.
So Marshall, if there's any time for questions or the audience wants to type anything in the chat, we're short on time, but
Thank you, Donna and Matilda. We've got time, I think, for one quick question, which I see in the chat, and it's related to chick length. Donna, is there any difference between breed and breed crosses to pay attention to, or is it basically just a standard?
There may be some small differences, but they're small. And basically, it's the standard that I use for all breeds.
Thank you very much. This is really valuable information, giving people the things to look for and the resources and the tools to help identify root causes. And it's an opportunity to work together as a production team to help improve chick quality, because a bulletproof chick can withstand a lot of challenges. And when we put chicks out there that are not thrifty and they don't survive, they succumb to a lot of different challenges. So with that, we're going to close because we're up on time. And I want to say a great big thank you to Matilda and to Donna and to all of those folks who took the time out to participate and listen to this webinar. Thank you very much, and good luck, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.